Genesis chapter 20 and 21, starting with 20, Abraham and Abimelech. Now, Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. This is on the cusp of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister,' and didn't she say also, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die." Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? What have you done? How have I wronged you that you have brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Abraham replied, "I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, 'This is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother.'" Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, "My land is before you. Live wherever you like." To Sarah he said, "I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated." Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves, so they could have children again. For the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife Sarah. The birth of Isaac, chapter 21. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." And she added, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." Hagar and Ishmael sent away. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. The treaty at Beersheba. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, "God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the country where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you." Abraham said, "I swear it." Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abraham, What is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, Accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba, because the two men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God, and Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. Chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Verses 1 through 18. If you feel like you've heard this story before, you have. In Genesis 12, 10 through 20, Abraham, fearing for his life, lied to Pharaoh about Sarah. He said she was his sister rather than his wife. God revealed Abraham's deception then, preventing Pharaoh from doing anything rash. In the end, Abraham left Egypt with more resources than when he had arrived. Years later, Abraham, finding himself in a similar position, this time with the king Abimelech, decided to pull the same stunt. Abraham said about his wife Sarah, she is my sister, and even though Sarah was 90 years old, she was apparently still quite attractive. The king immediately brought her to himself. Before anything could happen, however, God approached Abimelech in a dream, giving him news of the real relationship between Abraham and Sarah. King Abimelech's fear of God and his righteous life demonstrated his acceptance by God. He had responded by faith in the revelation he had received apart from participation in a prescribed sacrificial system. This faith before the coming of Christ allowed God to apply the death of Christ to his son, since in God's plan Jesus was crucified before the foundation of the world. See Revelations 13:8. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. This is the first time we see Abraham called a prophet. Abraham, in spite of his sin, was still God's spokesman. But it seems intentional that God uses that word now when Abraham is failing to act uprightly. Once again, it is an unbelieving king, not Abraham, who does the virtuous and right thing. Abraham, the prophet, should be humiliated for being rebuked by a heathen king. Abraham's actions before Abimelech were more dangerous than he probably realized. God had just promised to open Sarah's womb and let her conceive. The promise of a child, which Abraham and Sarah had been waiting on for 25 years, was on the cusp of fulfillment, but Abraham nearly threw it away. God himself had to intervene dramatically, threatening death to Abimelech and closing the wombs of Abimelech's entire household to keep his covenant intact. Chapter 21, verses 1 through 7. It had taken 25 years and the promise often seemed in doubt, but sure enough, the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. She became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham. Abraham and his wife demonstrated their faith by naming the boy Isaac, just as God had told them. The name Isaac, we will remember, means he laughs. But whereas the laughter of Abraham and Sarah had previously been scoffing and doubtful, with the fulfillment of the promise it transformed into the laughter of joy. Sarah herself recognized that everyone who heard her story would laugh with her. For what shows off the hilariously generous grace of God, more than a couple in their 90s having their first child. The grace of God often seems so absurd. Verse 8 through 13. Isaac's birth might have transformed his parents' mocking into laughter, but his presence precipitated another instance of mocking. Ishmael, the one Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham, began to mock his half-brother Isaac. Clearly, the tension between Hagar and Sarah had not fully dissipated as the feud passed from mother to son. Sarah saw Ishmael as a threat to her son's inheritance. In this, God saw an opportunity to remove Ishmael from the household so there would be no threat to the promised seed. But while God shared Sarah's concern that Ishmael not be a co-heir with Isaac, he did not share her animosity toward Ishmael. He reassured Abraham that he would also make a nation of Ishmael because he is Abraham's offspring. The Apostle Paul uses the separation of Ishmael and Isaac in Galatians 4:21 through 31 to illustrate the difference between flesh and spirit, law and grace. When the legitimate heir, that is spirit and grace, comes, there is no longer need for the illegitimate, that is the flesh and law. In fact, the two cannot coexist, so the flesh must be removed if believers are to experience freedom in the enjoyment of the promise of God. Verse 14 through 21. Hagar was sent into the wilderness for the second time, this time with her son Ishmael. As before, Hagar assumed that she would soon die. Out of water and unable to bear to watch her young son die of thirst, she left the boy under one of the bushes and went a distance away to await their deaths. But Ishmael means he hears, and just as God did before, God heard the boy crying. He provided as well, meeting their physical needs, and renewed the promise to make Ishmael a great nation, giving them spiritual hope for the journey ahead. Again, God shows compassion for a single mother in distress. Verse 22 through 32. Abraham's blessings continued to increase, which led to a new covenant with the powerful king Abimelech. Abimelech would receive some of Abraham's flocks and herds. In return, Abraham would retain rights to the well in Beersheba, which means well of the oath. Verse 33 through 34. Planting trees, as Abraham did here, was not a common part of most Old Testament covenants, but the symbol was an important one, as it signified that Abraham intended to coexist in the land with other nations. This tamarisk tree in Beersheba would be a sign of peace, security, and the appropriate kind of godly compromise. Abraham was doing what all believers should do, pursuing peace with his unbelieving neighbors without compromising his kingdom principles. The tree would also be a symbol of longevity, as Abraham anticipated that he and his descendants would stay on the land. This is why he refers to God as the everlasting God in this context. And that is the end of Genesis chapter 20 and 21. We finally got to the birth of Isaac, and and in chapter 22, we will see Abraham be tested, which, in my opinion, is a very funny chapter. And I will explain why when we get there. And then chapter 23, which covers the death of Sarah. And then we slowly start to transition from Abraham's part of the story to Isaac's part of the story. So God bless everyone, and I will see y'all next time.